The night was quiet, or at least it should have been. Lieutenant Jack Mercer, a Navy SEAL with 10 years of combat experience, led his team through a dense forest on the outskirts of enemy territory. His boots pressed softly into the muddy ground, and the only sounds were the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of generators in the target compound. Every step was deliberate, every breath measured. They were ghosts in the night, trained to move unseen, to strike without warning, and to vanish before the enemy could react. Behind him, his team of 6 operators followed in near-perfect formation. Peterson, the communications specialist, carried the satellite uplink and a sidearm, scanning for any electronic threats. Rodriguez, the heavy weapons expert, moved silently with an M249, the barrel wrapped in camouflage tape. The rest, Harris, Keller, Nguyen, and Thompson, each had a specialized role, each a part of a machine honed for combat. But machines weren't infallible. Machines didn't bleed. Humans did. And that night, Jack feared they would. The mission was simple on paper: insert, secure, extract. Capture the high-value target alive and leave before the compound even realized someone had crossed its perimeter. Simple, but intelligence had flaws, always did, and sometimes the flaws were fatal. Jack crouched, signaling a halt. He raised his hand, finger slicing the air in a silent stop. He scanned the horizon through night vision goggles. The compound was ahead, partially illuminated by flickering floodlights. Guards patrolled in predictable patterns, but Jack's instinct screamed, "Something's off." "Alpha formation," he whispered into the comms. "Move slow, eyes sharp, eyes sharp." The operators advanced, each footfall measured, every movement rehearsed 1,000 times in training. Jack felt the tension in the air, the kind that made the skin on his neck crawl and the stomach tighten. They were in hostile territory. Every shadow could conceal a weapon, every sound could signal death. They reached the outer perimeter of the compound without incident. Jack signaled Peterson to deploy a miniature drone. It buzzed above the structure, transmitting images back to their tablet. Patterns of movement were confirmed. Guards rotated every 5 minutes, lights shifted on a strict timer, and a single armored vehicle patrolled the main gate. Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. "We move on my mark," he said. 2 minutes to breach." 2 minutes, enough for a heartbeat, enough for life and death to decide the outcome. Then it happened. An explosion ripped through the night. The world became chaos. Dirt and shrapnel flew, smacking into faces and armor. Jack was thrown to the ground, ears ringing, heart hammering. He barely had time to process before gunfire erupted, automatic weapons cracking through the trees, tracer rounds streaking across the darkness. "Contact, contact, go," Jack yelled, rolling to his feet. The team moved with precision, returning fire in short bursts. His voice cut through the chaos, barking orders over the deafening sounds of destruction. Rodriguez suppressed that window, Keller left flank, Harris cover the rear. Every operator acted without hesitation. They were trained for this, but nothing could train someone for the unexpected. Explosions shook the ground as another blast detonated behind them. The rear perimeter of the compound had changed. Jack's instincts screamed, and he turned just in time to see a massive fireball consume the trees where his team had been advancing moments before. A scream, then silence. He lunged forward, pulling Rodriguez with him. They found shelter behind a fallen wall of cinder blocks, bullets ricocheting off every surface. Jack's helmet was scorched on one side. Smoke filled the air. His lungs burned. "Where Peterson?" Jack shouted, scanning frantically. Comms were dead. Peterson didn't respond. Another explosion hit, this one closer. Dust and debris rained down, choking their vision. Jack caught sight of a shadow moving erratically. His team scattered, the enemy exploiting every gap. And then he saw it. The space where he expected Peterson, Keller, Harris. They were gone. Panic clawed at his chest, but Jack swallowed it. Focus. You cannot die, not here, not now. He had to keep moving. He grabbed Rodriguez by the arm. "Go, go, go." They sprinted through the mud, dodging gunfire and explosions. Behind them, the enemy advanced relentlessly. Every second counted, every heartbeat was borrowed. They reached a clearing where extraction was supposed to be. The chopper was nowhere in sight. The signal for pickup was jammed, leaving them stranded in enemy territory. Jack's mind raced. He had to account for every man, every movement. He had to survive. And then he heard it, a faint cry for help. He turned. Through the smoke he saw a body partially covered in debris. It was Keller. He was unconscious, a leg pinned beneath rubble. Jack dropped his pack and moved with all his strength to free him, pulling with every ounce of muscle. Another explosion shook the ground, throwing them to the dirt. Jack's hands were raw, bleeding, but he didn't stop. He had to get Keller out. He had to survive. He had to make it back. Then the unthinkable happened. Another blast, closer this time, erupted just behind them. Jack's ears rang, his vision blurred. He turned to drag Keller again and felt a searing pain tear through his shoulder. He stumbled, collapsing against the mud. He looked up through the smoke, searching for his team. And then he realized something that made his stomach drop. The rest of the team, Peterson, Harris, Nguyen, Thompson, they were gone, vanished. Jack's mind screamed in disbelief. No, he muttered. He scrambled to his feet, but his body screamed with pain. Blood soaked his uniform. The forest around him was alive with movement, tracer rounds slicing through the night like fiery knives. And then silence. The helicopter had lifted, leaving him behind. Command had made the call, presumed KIA. Jack Mercer, Navy SEAL, team leader, tactical genius, was alone in enemy territory, wounded and officially dead in the eyes of the world. Yet somewhere in the shadows a pair of eyes watched him move, hidden, unseen, calculating. A single rifle glinted in the moonlight. Jack Mercer's fight for survival had just begun. The base was eerily quiet that morning, the kind of silence that presses against your chest and makes the heart beat too loudly in your ears. The SEAL team sat stiffly in the briefing room, the glow of computer screens casting pale light on their faces. Maps and mission reports littered the table, but no one touched them. No one spoke. Jack Mercer was officially missing in action. Command had given the formal briefing, presumed dead. The words hung in the room like a weight that threatened to crush the team. In the military, presumed dead meant closure, no more hope, no more waiting. But for the men who knew him, those words were a lie. Peterson clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "We left him there," he muttered under his breath. Rodriguez slammed his hand on the table, the vibration making the coffee cups jump. "We didn't leave him. We were forced out. Command pulled us." Harris just stared at the floor, jaw tight, hands trembling. Silence had replaced the usual chatter of the SEALs. None of them wanted to admit the truth. They felt helpless, defeated. They had lost more than a leader. They had lost their anchor. Far away in the dense terrain of hostile territory, Jack Mercer wasn't dead. Not yet. Pain radiated through every muscle, every bone. His left leg was mangled from the blast, and his shoulder burned where shrapnel had torn through muscle and tendon. Each movement was agony, but he couldn't stop. Survival wasn't a choice. It was the only option. He dragged himself across broken ground, fallen trees cutting into his back, mud sticking to every wound. The night was filled with unnatural sounds, the distant roar of generators, the sharp crack of gunfire, and worse, the soft but relentless movements of enemy patrols searching for survivors. Every time he tried to rest, Jack's ears caught a rustle, a whisper, or a snapping branch. He would tense, weapon at the ready, willing himself to stay alive. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had no meaning in the wilderness. Hunger and thirst gnawed at him, but the pain in his body was sharper, more insistent. His mind kept returning to his team. Had anyone survived? Were they still alive, or had he been the only one forced to endure this nightmare? Jack collapsed behind a crumbled wall of stone. He leaned his forehead against the cold surface, breathing shallowly, trying to stop the nausea. That's when he noticed movement, subtle, deliberate, controlled. A shadow shifted near the tree line. Someone was watching him. Instinctively, Jack raised his rifle, fighting the dizziness and blood loss. He squinted through the fog of pain. The shadow didn't move. Then a shot rang out, not at him, but at a group of enemy scouts closing in on his position. One enemy went down, his body crumpling silently to the earth. Jack's heart hammered. Whoever had just shot them had the precision of a ghost, a machine, someone who moved with lethal perfection. And then he saw her. A figure emerged from the shadows, crouched low, sniper rifle glinting faintly in the moonlight. Evelyn Viper Cross, known in classified circles as the deadliest operative no one officially acknowledged. The woman whose kills had been measured in impossible distances, whose presence could change the outcome of entire missions. She had found him. Jack's pride wanted to protest. He was a SEAL, trained to survive, trained to rely on no one. But his body wouldn't let him speak. He was bleeding, exhausted, and on the brink of collapse. Evelyn moved like a shadow, silent, precise. She knelt beside him, assessing his wounds quickly. "You've taken a beating," she said, voice calm, controlled. No introduction, no small talk, just efficiency. "I thought I was done for," Jack gasped, trying to sit upright. "You're not done," she replied. She applied field dressings with hands that were steady despite the chaos around them. Every movement was practiced, perfect. Jack felt a strange mix of relief and awe. She's a ghost, and she's saving me. The night stretched on as they moved together. Jack leaned on her more than he wanted to admit. She scouted, she cleared paths, she moved with precision through a landscape that had become death itself. Enemy patrols were everywhere, but she neutralized them silently, with bullets that whispered death and vanished into the dark. At one point they stumbled into a clearing and Jack froze. The enemy had them surrounded on 3 sides. He whispered, "We're trapped." Evelyn scanned the terrain. Without hesitation, she took aim at a guard crouched on a ridge, firing a single shot that dropped him before he could sound an alarm. Another patrol approached, and she fired again, then rolled into cover. Every shot was exact, every movement calculated. Jack moved behind her, still weak but focused, and realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. He was alive because of her. Not training, not luck, not his SEAL team, her. They pressed forward, moving deeper into hostile territory. Every sound made him flinch, every shadow made his pulse spike. But Evelyn was calm, always calm. She whispered instructions, guided him past danger, dragged him through mud and brush, and carried some of his weight when he faltered. Hours became dawn and the landscape changed from dark green to a gray blur under the rising sun. Jack could barely lift his head. Hunger, dehydration, and pain had started to erode his focus. But one thing remained crystal clear. The SEALs at base had declared him dead. And yet here he was, alive. Command at the base had begun the formal process. Paperwork, notifications, and condolence letters. They had given up on him. They didn't know. They didn't see the fight he was still in. But Jack did. And somewhere, hidden in the shadows, Evelyn's eyes never left him. She had no name in the mission logs, no official credit. But to Jack in that moment, she was the difference between life and death. As dawn broke fully, they found temporary cover in the remains of an abandoned building. Jack collapsed onto the floor, every inch of him screaming in pain. Evelyn crouched beside him, checking wounds, applying antiseptic with care. "You'll make it," she said simply. "No false hope, no exaggeration, just truth." Jack wanted to argue, to insist he could survive alone, but the truth was undeniable. Without her, he wouldn't have made it through the night. He closed his eyes, allowing himself a brief moment of vulnerability, trusting her in a way he hadn't trusted anyone outside his SEAL team. And then the unmistakable sound of enemy movement echoed through the building. They were still being hunted. Jack opened his eyes, knowing the fight wasn't over. Survival had only just begun. Somewhere far away, the base continued its process, unaware that the man they had declared dead was still very much alive, and that his salvation had come not from the SEALs they sent in, but from a shadow no one officially recognized. And as the sun climbed higher, a single thought burned in Jack's mind: I'm not done yet, and I'm going to get out of this alive. The first rays of dawn barely penetrated the dense canopy, painting the forest in shades of gray and green. The air was thick with smoke, gunpowder, and the coppery scent of blood. Jack Mercer leaned heavily against a crumbling wall, his body screaming with every movement. His leg throbbed, his shoulder burned, and his mind raced between survival and despair. "Keep breathing," said a voice, soft, controlled, and unnervingly calm. Jack's head snapped up. The sniper, the woman whose presence had already saved his life multiple times in the last 24 hours, crouched nearby, scanning the perimeter with practiced ease. Every detail mattered: the angle of the rising sun, the subtle shadows in the tree line, the faint movement of leaves that betrayed an enemy patrol's approach. Her name was Evelyn Cross, though few officially knew it. In military circles she was whispered about, debated, and sometimes denied. Viper, ghost, legend. Some said she never existed. Others knew better: she did, and if you were unlucky enough to be her target, you were already dead before you realized it. Jack swallowed back a groan of pain as she adjusted the strap on her rifle, eyes never leaving the forest edge. "You'll need to move," she said. "They'll be back, and this time they'll be expecting us." Jack shook his head weakly. I don't know if I can." "You don't have a choice." Her tone was firm but not unkind. Evelyn crouched beside him and examined his wounds. The blast had torn through his left leg, leaving jagged flesh and muscle exposed. She worked quickly, tying makeshift tourniquets and pressing antiseptic cloths against the worst of the burns. Her hands were steady, almost surgical, and Jack couldn't stop himself from staring. She was calm in a way he had never seen, focused in a way that defied human limits. "Lean on me," she said, grabbing his arm and pulling him upright. His body resisted, every movement a battle with pain and exhaustion, but her strength and steadiness carried him forward. They moved through the forest in near silence, every sound amplified in Jack's ears. The distant chatter of enemy patrols, the snapping of twigs beneath their own feet, the rustle of leaves, all of it could mean life or death. Evelyn led, crouched low, a shadow blending seamlessly with the terrain. Her rifle never left her shoulder, scanning and clearing every threat with a precision that made Jack's jaw tighten in awe and fear. Hours passed like minutes. They had no map, no extraction coordinates, no guarantee of safety. Every step was a gamble, yet Evelyn moved as if the forest itself obeyed her commands. She took down enemy scouts silently, one by one, with shots so precise it was impossible to track the bullet's path. Jack followed, relying on her guidance, feeling a strange sense of comfort in her competence. At one point they reached a ridge overlooking a valley. Jack collapsed against a rock, panting and sweating, his leg almost useless. Evelyn knelt beside him, scanning the valley below. "They'll be here soon," she said. "We have to move before they realize we're still alive." Jack tried to protest. "You don't have to." "I do," she interrupted, eyes cold and unyielding. "They're counting on us being dead. That ends now." And with that she set up a vantage point, taking out 2 more enemy patrols with single, impossibly precise shots. Jack watched, amazed and terrified. The recoil of her rifle barely moved her body. Her focus was absolute. She was more than human, or at least that's what it felt like. The forest began to thin as they moved, the valley opening into a series of abandoned farmhouses. Broken windows, collapsed roofs, and overgrown fields marked the remnants of life that had once existed here. Jack stumbled over a fence post, nearly losing his footing. Evelyn caught him instantly, pressing him close and pulling him upright. "You're heavier than you look," she said with a hint of dry humor, but her tone remained sharp, professional. Jack gave a weak smile. "I could say the same." She didn't reply, just pulled him along. Every so often she would pause, raise her rifle, and scan the horizon. Jack realized with a sinking feeling that they were walking into a trap. The enemy knew someone was alive. Every move they made was being watched, anticipated, calculated. By midday, they reached an abandoned barn at the edge of the valley. It was a temporary refuge, but it would have to do. Jack sank to the floor, muscles trembling, sweat mixing with blood and dirt. Evelyn knelt beside him, removing her gloves to examine his wounds more thoroughly. "You're lucky," she said. "Most don't make it this far, and even fewer survive without immediate evacuation." I don't even know who you are," Jack said between labored breaths. "You'll know soon enough," she replied, her eyes never leaving the door. "Right now, surviving matters more than names." Jack's mind raced. Questions about her identity, her mission, and her motives burned like fire, but he had no energy to dwell on them. He had survived this long by instinct, by training, and now, thanks to this woman, he might actually make it out alive. The sound of movement outside snapped them both to attention. Evelyn raised her rifle, scanning the perimeter. Jack instinctively ducked, heart hammering. 2 enemy scouts appeared, moving cautiously toward the barn. Evelyn fired twice. Both men dropped silently, no sound beyond the faint thud of impact. Jack's eyes widened. How do you do that?" Evelyn didn't answer. She only motioned for him to move. "We're not done yet." They left the barn cautiously, moving toward a ridge that led to higher ground. Somewhere they could signal for extraction, somewhere they might find safety. Every step was agony for Jack, but he kept moving, relying on Evelyn's guidance and the sheer force of will that seemed to radiate from her. Hours later, they paused behind a crumbled wall overlooking a narrow valley. Jack's chest heaved, his leg almost numb from injury. Evelyn set up a small, compact radio, trying to send a signal to command. Static filled the device, the faint hope of rescue almost slipping away. "Hold still," she said, adjusting his position. Her hands were steady, her eyes sharp. Jack met her gaze, suddenly realizing something he hadn't allowed himself to admit. He trusted her more than anyone in his entire unit. Not because he had a choice, but because she had proven, over and over, that she was capable of keeping him alive when death seemed inevitable. And then finally, the faintest crackle came through the radio. A signal, a lifeline. Jack's heart leapt, but Evelyn's expression remained controlled. "It's not enough," she said. "They can trace us and they're fast. We have maybe minutes before they triangulate." Jack looked out at the valley below, enemy patrols moving like ants, and realized that the fight wasn't over. Survival had brought him to her, yes, but it would take more than luck to make it back alive. Evelyn scanned the terrain one last time. "Ready?" she asked. Jack nodded, despite the pain, despite the exhaustion, despite the fear. "Let's finish this." And with that, they moved forward, 2 shadows in a hostile world, one a wounded leader, the other a legendary sniper, both fighting against impossible odds, both knowing that failure meant death. Somewhere in the forest, the enemy watched, unaware that the man they thought was dead was alive, and that the woman moving beside him was more than a legend. She was a force of nature, and together they were unstoppable. Jack Mercer had been declared lost, but he wasn't gone. Not yet. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of broken trees, dense underbrush, and shadows that shifted with every step. Jack Mercer leaned heavily on Evelyn Cross, each movement a struggle against the pain in his leg and the throbbing wound in his shoulder. His breaths came in ragged gasps, each one a battle against exhaustion and fear. Evelyn moved ahead, her rifle at the ready, eyes sharp, scanning every tree line, every mound of earth, every shadow. Jack tried to keep pace, but his body protested violently. Every step sent shockwaves of pain through him, and for a fleeting moment he questioned whether he could continue. "You're slower than I thought," Evelyn said, not unkindly. Her tone was steady, professional, but there was a subtle edge that hinted at concern. "Stay behind me, don't fall." Jack gritted his teeth. I can keep up. You will keep up, she replied, voice firm. She scanned the tree line again, then crouched, pressing herself against a fallen log. Her movements were precise, deliberate. A sniper's instinct. Jack followed suit, heart hammering as he realized what had just happened. Two enemy scouts had emerged from the underbrush, moving cautiously toward their position. Before Jack could even think, Evelyn fired. 1, 2, 3 shots, silent and precise. Both patrol members collapsed silently without a sound beyond the faint impact thud. Jack's eyes widened in disbelief. How do you do that? Practice, she said with a faint smirk, then immediately refocused. No time to talk, move. The SEAL leader stumbled behind her, each step a test of endurance. His muscles screamed, his leg burned like fire, and yet he pressed on. Evelyn guided him with subtle nudges, her hands firm but gentle, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for threats. She moved like a shadow, part of the forest itself, blending seamlessly with the terrain, always one step ahead. They moved in near silence for what felt like hours, the forest closing around them like a living cage. Enemy patrols were everywhere, yet somehow, Evelyn's precision and planning kept them alive. She was always calculating, predicting, anticipating. Every shot she fired, every path she chose, was the difference between survival and death. At one point, they reached a narrow creek cutting through the forest. Jack paused, utterly spent, and slid down to sit on the damp bank. Evelyn knelt beside him, checking his wounds again. You're bleeding more than I thought, she said. We can't stop long. They'll find us if we linger. I can't move, Jack whispered, voice trembling. The weight of exhaustion, fear, and pain threatened to overwhelm him. Evelyn's eyes softened just slightly, though her tone remained sharp. Yes, you can, and you will. I won't let you die here. Not now, not ever. Jack's pride wanted to argue, wanted to insist he could survive alone. But the truth was undeniable. He would be dead without her. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to rise, leaning on her as she guided him across the shallow water. The creek ended at a small ridge overlooking a partially destroyed village. Evelyn stopped, scanning carefully. This is it. We move across fast or we get trapped. Enemy reinforcements will be here in less than 20 minutes. Jack's stomach dropped. The village below was exposed, open to fire from multiple angles. He could see enemy soldiers patrolling the streets, their movements deliberate, organized. Evelyn assessed the situation, then whispered instructions with surgical precision. Move to that wall. Wait for my signal. Cover every shadow. Don't make a sound. They advanced carefully, crouched low, every step calculated. Jack's leg burned with every movement, but he pushed through, trusting her implicitly. Evelyn took the lead, sniper rifle at the ready, clearing every path with lethal precision. One enemy patrol approached a burned-out building. They never saw her. 2 well-placed shots later, they collapsed silently, and Jack's respect for her skills deepened. As they reached the wall, a sudden burst of gunfire erupted from the other side of the village. Jack instinctively ducked, heart hammering. Bullets tore through wood and stone, splinters flying around them. Evelyn pressed him flat against the wall, returning fire with deadly accuracy. They're coming from the rooftops, Jack yelled, adrenaline surging. I see them, Evelyn responded. Stay down. Her rifle barked 3 more times, each shot dropping a sniper who had been tracking their movement. The chaos was disorienting, terrifying, but Evelyn remained composed, calm, focused. Every move was deliberate, every shot measured. Jack struggled to keep his breathing steady, watching her in awe. She was a ghost, untouchable and yet very real. How are you so perfect? He muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. Evelyn's eyes flicked toward him briefly. Perfection doesn't exist, she said. Only survival. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they moved across the village, each step a gamble. Enemy reinforcements were closing in from all sides, and the odds were stacked against them. Yet somehow, Evelyn kept them alive. Every patrol neutralized before it could detect them, every movement calculated to avoid exposure. At one point, Jack stumbled, his injured leg giving way. Evelyn grabbed him instantly, pulling him behind a collapsed wall just as a hail of bullets tore into the ground where he had been seconds before. His heart pounded in his chest. If she hadn't been there, he would be dead. "Thank you," he whispered, breath ragged. "Save your thanks for later," she replied, voice firm. "Focus on staying alive." By midday, they reached a small, abandoned farmhouse on the edge of the village. It offered temporary shelter, but Evelyn knew it wouldn't hold for long. She quickly assessed the structure, checking for weaknesses, potential entry points for enemy forces. Jack slumped against the wall, muscles trembling, sweat and blood streaked across his face. "You're not done yet," she said. "We have to move again soon. Reinforcements will be here any minute. We only get one shot at this." Jack's mind reeled. He had survived explosions, ambushes, and near-fatal injuries, but the constant pressure, the unrelenting danger, was almost too much to bear. Yet he trusted Evelyn completely. He knew that as long as she was with him, there was a chance to survive. Evelyn knelt beside him, checking the wounds on his shoulder and leg again. "You're stronger than I thought," she said. "But don't push too far. We can't afford to have you collapse in the open." Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. "I won't let you carry me forever," he said, voice strained. "You won't have to," she replied, eyes cold and calculating. "Keep moving, survive, that's all that matters." As they prepared to move again, the distant roar of engines echoed through the valley. Enemy reinforcements were arriving faster than expected. Jack's stomach dropped. They were running out of time, and one misstep could mean death. Evelyn glanced at him, expression unreadable. "Ready." Jack nodded, despite the pain, despite the fear, despite the exhaustion. "Let's finish this." And with that they moved out, two shadows in a hostile world, one a wounded SEAL leader, the other a legendary sniper, both fighting against impossible odds, both knowing that failure meant death. For the first time since the mission began, Jack felt a spark of hope. Not because he was strong enough to survive on his own, but because Evelyn Cross, the woman behind the scope, was guiding him through the storm. Somewhere in the forest, enemy eyes watched, unaware that the man they thought was dead was alive, and that the woman moving beside him was more than a myth. She was real, and together they were unstoppable. The valley stretched before them like a minefield. Jack Mercer moved cautiously behind Evelyn Cross, each step a test of endurance. The adrenaline from the previous night's firefights had begun to fade, replaced by the burning fatigue of injuries, hunger, and dehydration. Every breath was a struggle. Every heartbeat felt amplified, pounding in his chest like a drum of war. Evelyn led them toward a small clearing at the edge of the forest. It was the only viable spot where a signal could reach command, a window of hope in a nightmarish world. Jack's leg throbbed with every step, the makeshift tourniquet cutting into flesh. Sweat and blood streaked his face, his body slick with pain. Yet he pressed on, leaning on Evelyn for guidance, trusting her instincts completely. "You're slower than I like," Evelyn muttered, scanning the tree line. Her tone was cold, measured, but Jack noticed the faint tension in her shoulders. She wasn't just protecting him. She was calculating everything: angles of fire, potential threats, extraction routes. Every movement had a purpose. "I'm trying," he gasped, teeth gritted. "You will keep up," she said sharply. She didn't glance back, she never did. Her eyes were locked on the distant ridgeline where enemy patrols moved like ants in a carefully orchestrated pattern. "They've learned our route. They're expecting us." Jack swallowed, fear coiling in his stomach. He had survived ambushes before, explosions and gunfire, but nothing like this. Here, every breath could be his last. Every shadow could conceal death. Finally, they reached the edge of the clearing. The ground dropped sharply into a narrow valley. In the center, a ruined barn offered minimal cover, and beyond it, the faint outline of an abandoned road marked the potential landing zone for extraction. Evelyn knelt, quickly setting up a compact radio, adjusting dials and antennas. The device crackled to life, but static dominated the signal. "We need to get this out," she muttered. Her fingers flew over the controls with precision. "Command has to know you're alive. They're assuming—" She didn't finish. Words were unnecessary. Death lurked in every corner and time was bleeding away. Jack leaned against a rock, breathing shallowly. "Will they come?" he asked, voice hoarse. Evelyn's eyes never left the tree line. "If we send the signal, yes, but it's risky. They can trace us. Any wrong move and we're dead before help arrives." Jack's stomach tightened. He had been declared dead by his own command. Officially, he no longer existed. Yet here he was, alive, relying on a shadow, a ghost, a woman no one officially recognized. "Ready?" she asked, voice calm. Jack nodded. He didn't have a choice. She raised the radio high, pressing the transmitter against the ridge. Her fingers danced over the buttons, sending an encrypted signal. Every second stretched, thick with tension. Enemy patrols shifted in the forest below, alert and dangerous. Then came the faint crackle, the sound of communication, distant but unmistakable. Evelyn's lips tightened. "They got it," she whispered. Somewhere far away, command intercepted the signal. Analysts blinked at the screen, stunned. The ID matched that of Lieutenant Jack Mercer. His biometric data confirmed he was alive, though critical. Shock rippled through the offices of command. Reports had been filed marking him as MIA, presumed dead. And yet the signal proved the impossible. He was still alive. Back in the valley, Evelyn lowered the radio. She didn't exhale. She never allowed herself that luxury. "We have confirmation," she said. "Extraction is aware, but they're hours away. We're not out of this yet." Jack pressed his hands to his face, exhaustion crashing over him. "Hours," he muttered. "We won't make it." Evelyn's gaze hardened. "We will stay focused. Move when I say." Suddenly, movement in the tree line, a flash of uniform, a glint of metal. Enemy patrols had discovered the ridge. Jack's heart surged. Bullets tore through the underbrush, ricocheting off rocks around them. Evelyn fired twice, two enemies dropping silently, their bodies blending into the forest floor. She moved like a phantom, every shot precise, every breath controlled. Jack pressed against her back, fear and awe mingling in equal measure. How are you doing this?" he gasped. "Surviving," she said, tone flat. "Focus on staying alive, don't get shot, don't get killed." The forest erupted in a sudden burst of chaos. Reinforcements had arrived. Jack realized with dawning horror that they were surrounded on three sides. The extraction signal had worked, but now the enemy was converging, closing the net like a trap. Evelyn's eyes flicked over the ridge, calculating. "Move," she shouted. "We're breaking through the left flank. Cover your wounds, keep low." Jack obeyed, stumbling but pushing forward. Evelyn fired again, each shot dropping a patrol before they could react. Bullets zipped past, some grazing his armor, others cutting through the earth at his feet. Fear coursed through his veins, but so did a strange, fierce hope. Evelyn was in control. She always was. They reached the ruined barn at the edge of the valley. Evelyn kicked open the door and Jack stumbled inside, collapsing against a wall. She followed, immediately covering the doorway. "Stay low. Don't move unless I say." Moments later, the enemy patrol appeared outside the barn. Evelyn fired twice through a small crack, the shots echoing in the enclosed space. The patrol collapsed silently. Jack's heart pounded. He had survived, yes, but the woman beside him had kept him alive. Again. He looked at her, chest heaving. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the tree line, calculating the next move. "Because you're not just anyone," she said finally. "You're one of theirs, and I don't let them die, not if I can help it." Jack's chest tightened. He wanted to say something more, to thank her properly, to ask questions, but he had no energy. Every thought, every movement, every ounce of will was devoted to survival. Suddenly, the faint thrum of helicopter blades reached their ears. The extraction team had arrived, finally. Jack's heart leapt, hope surging through him, but Evelyn remained calm. "We move now," she said. "Cover me, follow my lead. One wrong step." Jack nodded, gripping his rifle. Every step through the forest to the clearing was tense, every shadow a potential threat. Evelyn led, moving with unmatched precision, neutralizing a final enemy scout who had almost spotted them. The helicopter landed, its rotors throwing dirt and leaves into the air, the sound deafening yet a symbol of salvation. Jack staggered toward the aircraft, limping, bleeding, but alive. As he was lifted inside, he glanced back. Evelyn remained crouched, scanning the perimeter, ensuring their extraction was safe. And then, almost like a shadow, she disappeared into the forest, leaving only a faint imprint of her legend behind. Somewhere across the globe, Command received the confirmation. Jack Mercer was alive. Not just alive, he had survived impossible odds thanks to a ghost no one officially acknowledged. And for the first time since the mission began, Jack allowed himself to hope. Some heroes are remembered, some remain in the shadows. Evelyn Cross had chosen the latter, and the world would never know she had saved a Navy SEAL leader from the jaws of death. But Jack Mercer knew, and that knowledge burned brighter than any medal, any report, any official recognition. He had been declared lost, but a legend had found him and brought him back. The sound of helicopter blades cut through the forest like a distant thunderstorm, carrying a promise of hope or death. Jack Mercer stumbled forward, every step agony, sweat and blood streaking his face. His leg burned with each movement, his shoulder pulsed in sharp, stabbing pain, and his chest heaved as though his lungs were trying to escape his ribcage. But he was alive. He was alive. Behind him, Evelyn Cross moved like a shadow. Her rifle never left her shoulder, eyes scanning the surrounding tree line, muscles tense, every nerve alive with anticipation. She had cleared this path before, but now it was a race against time. Enemy patrols were converging, faster and more organized than before. Every second counted. "Stay close," Evelyn shouted over the roar of the approaching helicopter. Jack nodded, gritting his teeth against the pain. He could barely run, barely breathe, but he trusted her. Every move she made was precise, calculated, lethal. She wasn't just leading him to safety, she was controlling life and death with every step. And then he heard it, the first signs of movement beyond the clearing, enemy reinforcements. They had learned his position from the initial firefight, likely from the sounds of gunfire the night before. Jack's stomach tightened. They were surrounded again, this time with no room for error. Evelyn gestured sharply. "Cover left, move behind me." Bullets tore through the underbrush around them. Jack ducked instinctively, the bark of trees splintering under enemy fire. Evelyn returned shots with deadly precision, each one dropping an approaching enemy operator before they could fire again. Jack watched, awe and terror mingling in equal measure. He struggled to keep pace, the adrenaline pumping in his veins, pain screaming in his leg. "I can't keep up," he gasped. "You will," Evelyn snapped, dragging him forward. "No excuses, live or die, your choice." Minutes stretched into eternity as they fought their way across the open clearing toward the landing zone. Evelyn's eyes never wavered. Every shadow, every movement, every sound was analyzed instantly. She fired, rolled, moved, fired again, neutralizing threat after threat. Jack followed, stumbling, leaning on her, surviving because of her presence. The helicopter hovered above the clearing now, downwash whipping leaves and dirt into a storm around them. Extraction was so close he could taste it, but so was death. Enemy snipers had taken positions on the ridge above. A single shot could end this mission in seconds. Evelyn raised her rifle, scanning the tree line. "Snipers at 2 o'clock, stay low." Jack flattened himself against the ground, grit and blood mixing with mud as bullets pinged off rocks and debris. Evelyn fired 3 shots in rapid succession, dropping the snipers before they could pull the trigger. Jack's heart raced. He was alive because of her. Again. The helicopter's rope ladder descended into the clearing, swinging wildly in the rotor wash. Jack could see the team inside waiting. His team. His brothers. Relief surged, but there was no time to celebrate. "Go move," Evelyn shouted. "One at a time, quick, careful." Jack clutched the ladder, hauling his body upward. Pain screamed through every muscle, but he pushed through it, lifted by sheer willpower and desperation. Below him, Evelyn covered every angle, taking out enemies who dared to approach. She was relentless, unstoppable, and utterly lethal. "Go, go, go," she barked at him as Rodriguez, Harris, and the rest of the SEAL team began landing in the clearing. Jack's chest tightened with a mix of relief and disbelief. He had been declared dead, presumed lost, and yet here he was, alive, wounded, and being rescued by a woman no one officially acknowledged. As Jack reached the helicopter, he looked back. Evelyn crouched low, rifle raised, scanning the perimeter, covering the team's extraction. Her presence was almost unreal, like a shadow that couldn't be touched. She moved, fired, and vanished between moments of chaos, her focus absolute. Jack's heart pounded as the helicopter lifted. The ground fell away beneath them. The enemy's gunfire rattled the air, but Evelyn's suppression had bought them the seconds they needed. Jack slumped onto the floor of the aircraft, exhaustion and relief crashing over him in equal measure. "Are you okay?" Peterson asked, rushing to check his leader's injuries. Jack nodded weakly. I think so," he murmured. His mind was still racing. "But she's still out there." Evelyn didn't board. She remained crouched at the clearing's edge, eyes scanning, every sense alive. She had done her job, ensured extraction, and would remain unseen. Jack wanted to protest, to demand she come with them, but she shook her head slightly. A silent acknowledgement that her work wasn't done, that she couldn't be caught, that she was part of another world entirely. As the helicopter gained altitude, Jack finally allowed himself to breathe. The team was alive. He was alive. Extraction had worked. Command would soon know the impossible truth. He wasn't dead. Inside the helicopter, Jack looked around at his brothers, Rodriguez, Harris, Keller, Peterson. Each of them was battered, exhausted, shaken, but alive. Relief and guilt mingled in equal measure. He had survived, but the memory of the chaos, the firefights, and the fear would stay with him forever. "Where's she?" Jack asked quietly, voice low. Peterson shook his head. "Who?" Jack hesitated, then whispered, "The sniper, the woman. She saved my life, she covered us, she's not coming with us." Rodriguez frowned. Some people aren't meant to be known. Some ghosts save lives and vanish. Jack's chest tightened. He realized that was exactly what she was, a ghost, a legend. Someone who didn't need recognition, didn't need medals, didn't need anyone to know she existed. She only needed to survive and ensure others did too. The helicopter flew onward, leaving the valley and its dangers behind. Jack Mercer looked out the window, the forest shrinking below him, a world that had tried to kill him. And he thought of Evelyn Cross, the woman behind the scope, the shadow who had fought through impossible odds to bring him home. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her rank. He didn't know if anyone would ever know what she had done. But he knew one thing: he owed her his life. Some heroes are remembered. Some operate in the shadows. Evelyn Cross had chosen the latter, and Jack Mercer, Navy SEAL leader, would carry her legacy in his heart forever. The sun rose over the horizon, casting light on the battered, wounded, but surviving men of a mission that had gone wrong. Somewhere in the forest, a shadow disappeared into the trees, her work complete, her existence a secret. And the world would never know the woman who had saved a Navy SEAL leader from death itself. Jack Mercer closed his eyes for the first time since the night had begun. He was alive. His team was alive. And somewhere in the shadows, a legend walked unseen. The helicopter cut through the early morning sky, carrying Jack Mercer and his team away from the chaos of the valley. Below, the forest shrank into a mosaic of shadows and broken trees, the battlefield they had survived disappearing beneath the rotor wash. Jack leaned against the side of the aircraft, muscles trembling, chest heaving, sweat and blood clinging to his uniform. For the first time in nearly 48 hours, he allowed himself a moment to breathe. But the relief was fleeting. Memories of explosions, screams, and gunfire pressed against his mind like a vice. And above all, the image of her, Evelyn Cross, haunted him. She had saved him. Not once, not twice, but countless times. Every sniper shot, every tactical maneuver, every whisper of guidance had kept him alive. And now she was gone, slipping back into the shadows like a ghost. Jack closed his eyes, letting the hum of the helicopter fill the silence. His team around him was silent, exhausted, and yet alive. Rodriguez slumped against the opposite wall, checking the straps on his gear. Harris muttered something under his breath, trying to suppress a shiver. Peterson fiddled with his comms, still in disbelief at the confirmed proof of life they had sent. When they landed at the forward operating base, the tension shifted, replaced by a flurry of activity. Medical personnel rushed to assess Jack and his team, wrapping wounds, administering fluids, and giving adrenaline shots to keep them conscious. Every movement was a blur, a flurry of hands, voices, and equipment. Jack barely registered it all, his body and mind still tethered to the battle they had just survived. A senior officer approached him, eyes wide with disbelief. "Lieutenant Mercer," he said, voice shaking slightly, we thought you were lost, presumed dead. How?" Jack straightened as best he could, wincing at the pain. "I survived," he said simply, the words hollow compared to the chaos he had endured. "But not alone." The officer frowned. "Not alone." Jack's eyes hardened, recalling every sniper shot, every calculated movement, every life-saving decision Evelyn had made in the darkness of the valley. "There was a woman," he said slowly. "A sniper. She saved my life. Kept me alive when I couldn't even move. She's a ghost." The officer blinked, trying to process the statement. "A ghost? What do you mean?" Jack shook his head. "You wouldn't understand. She doesn't exist on paper. No one will ever officially acknowledge her, but she's real, and she's why I'm here today." A silence fell over the room. Official reports had already documented Jack as MIA. Media outlets had begun preparing statements, condolences, even presumed fatality coverage. And now Jack was alive, insisting that a legend, someone no one could officially record, was the reason for his survival. Medical personnel finished tending to him and his team. Jack stepped aside, breathing heavily, muscles still trembling. Command called for a debriefing in a secure operations room, but Jack's mind was elsewhere. He could still hear the sound of gunfire, still see the shadowed figure of Evelyn, still feel the weight of the battles they had endured together. The debriefing began. Jack recounted the events, the ambush, the explosions, the injuries, and most importantly, the extraction. Analysts and officers listened, taking notes, but their faces betrayed skepticism when he mentioned Evelyn Cross. "She doesn't exist," one analyst murmured quietly, almost to himself. "She exists," Jack said firmly, meeting every pair of eyes in the room. "I wouldn't be alive if not for her. Not a single one of us would have made it. I owe her everything." Silence followed, thick and uncomfortable. Command officers whispered among themselves. Recognition in the military was official, documented, logged. Evelyn had no record, no file, no mission authorization attached to her actions. She existed only in the shadows. Jack clenched his fists. "You may not have her on any roster, but she's real. She saved lives, my life. And if you can't recognize that, then at least remember that some people operate outside your rules, and sometimes those people are the difference between life and death." The room remained silent. Eventually, a senior commander spoke. "Lieutenant Mercer, your survival is remarkable. Your leadership and the team's execution under fire are commendable. And while we cannot officially document certain aspects, your testimony will be included in classified records." Jack nodded slowly. It was enough. Not recognition, not medals, not public praise, but enough to ensure Evelyn's existence would not be completely erased. Somewhere deep in the classified archives, her role would live on, unseen but real. Later in the quiet of the hangar, Jack stood alone, staring at the night sky. The stars stretched endlessly above him, a reminder of the vast world beyond the battlefield. He thought of Evelyn Cross, moving through forests and shadows, saving lives without anyone knowing. He wanted to find her to thank her properly, but he also understood that she would never allow herself to be found. Peterson approached, handing him a warm drink. "You've been through hell," he said quietly. "We all have." Jack took the cup, letting the warmth seep into his cold fingers. "We survived," he said, eyes still on the stars. "But not because of us, because of her." Rodriguez leaned against the wall nearby. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" he asked with a smirk, despite the exhaustion. Jack shook his head. "No, she saved my life, and someday someone has to know, even if it's just me." Days later, debriefs continued and official reports began to filter through the chain of command. Jack's return caused a ripple effect. Officers questioned logistics, medics reviewed timelines, analysts verified proof of life. But Evelyn's name never appeared. She remained a shadow, an unrecorded hero. Jack accepted the official recognition he could receive: medals for survival, commendations for leadership, and the praise of his team. But in the quiet moments, away from paperwork and protocol, he replayed every shot she had taken, every path she had cleared, every time she had risked her life for his. He realized something important. Some heroes do not need medals. Some heroes do not need recognition. Evelyn Cross had chosen to exist in the shadows, to operate beyond the bounds of official acknowledgement, to save lives without expecting anything in return. And that made her more powerful than any public accolade could convey. Weeks later, Jack returned to his training unit. His team was waiting, their faces a mixture of relief, curiosity, and awe. "We thought you were gone," Keller said quietly. Jack smiled faintly, grim but full of respect. "I was lost," he said, "but I was found, by someone you'll never meet, someone who made sure we all made it home." Harris raised an eyebrow. "A ghost?" Jack nodded. "A ghost, a legend, someone who saved my life, and I'll never forget her, not ever." In the days that followed, Jack worked tirelessly with his team, debriefing, training, and rebuilding. But every now and then, when the world was quiet and the memories pressed in, he would look at the horizon, remember the woman behind the scope, and smile. Some legends never appear in reports. Some names are never recorded. But their deeds echo, invisible but undeniable. And for Jack Mercer, the Navy SEAL leader who had been declared lost, one name burned brighter than any medal or citation: Evelyn Cross. She had saved him. She had saved them all. And in the shadowed corners of memory, she would always be recognized. Weeks had passed since Jack Mercer and his SEAL team had returned to base. The initial chaos of his resurrection had settled into routine: debriefings, medical checkups, and official paperwork that tried to reconcile the impossible truth of his survival. But no matter how meticulous the reports, no medal, no commendation, and no photograph could capture the figure who had kept him alive: the woman in the shadows, Evelyn Cross. Jack had spent hours replaying every moment of their harrowing escape. Every sniper shot, every tactical maneuver, every whispered instruction that had saved his life haunted him with clarity. He had been declared dead, presumed lost, and yet here he was, alive, because she had chosen to operate beyond recognition, beyond the rules, beyond fear. He walked through the hangar, watching his team train, their bodies moving with precision, their minds still carrying the trauma of the mission. Rodriguez was leading a drill, Harris and Keller followed, and Peterson meticulously checked every weapon and comms device. They were alive, they were intact, and they owed their survival to a ghost no one else would ever officially acknowledge. Jack leaned against a wall, arms crossed, eyes distant. Command had accepted the official reports of survival, but they had ignored the crucial detail: Evelyn. Her name never appeared in the logs, no commendation would ever bear it, and no press release would tell the world who she was. She existed only in the shadows, her deeds invisible to everyone but him. The thought gnawed at him. Recognition had its place, yes, but so did humility, sacrifice, and the kind of bravery that didn't need applause. Evelyn embodied all of it. She had moved through a battlefield alone, unseen, making life-or-death decisions that no one else could comprehend. And then she had vanished. No trace, no report, just survival. Jack's communicator buzzed, snapping him from his reverie. A call from command. The voice was professional, calm, but curious. "Lieutenant Mercer, we've reviewed your debriefings and battlefield data. Your survival is extraordinary. We want to commend you formally. And your team." Jack nodded slowly. "Understood, sir." "Additionally," the voice continued, "there is mention in your debrief of a sniper who assisted you during extraction. Can you provide more details?" Jack hesitated. He could tell them everything, give them names, locations, and timelines, but Evelyn's existence was classified, unofficial, and untouchable. Revealing her could endanger her, or worse, strip her of the freedom that allowed her to operate in the shadows. "No, sir," he said finally. "She prefers to remain unrecognized. She's a professional, that's all you need to know." The voice paused. "Understood, noted in classified records." Jack exhaled quietly, letting the weight lift slightly. She would remain a ghost, and that was exactly as she wanted it. Later, he met his team in the briefing room. The walls were lined with charts, satellite imagery, and after-action reports. But Jack's focus was elsewhere. He pictured the valley, the destroyed barn, the forest riddled with enemies, and above it all, Evelyn crouched with unwavering precision. She had been their savior, their shadowed guardian, their unseen hero. Rodriguez noticed his distant expression. "You're still thinking about her, aren't you?" Jack nodded. "Every moment," he admitted. "She saved my life. She saved all of ours, and the world will never know." Peterson shook his head. "Some people aren't meant to be known. Some ghosts walk among us and leave footprints only those who need to see them can recognize." Jack smiled faintly. "Exactly. She's more than a hero, she's a legend, and legends don't need recognition." Days turned into weeks. Jack resumed his duties, leading training exercises, coordinating missions, and mentoring younger SEALs. But the memory of Evelyn remained, like a shadowed presence guiding him even in her absence. He studied tactics differently now, considering how one operative, operating beyond rules, could turn the tide of a life-or-death situation. He shared fragments of the story with his team, not full details, never names, but enough to impress upon them the power of silent courage, the value of trust, and the reality that some battles were won in shadows. Then one evening, after another grueling day of training, Jack found himself alone on the roof of the base, staring at the horizon where the sun sank behind distant mountains. The sky burned orange and red, reflecting the fire and chaos of the valley they had survived. He thought of Evelyn Cross, moving through forests, saving lives and remaining unseen. "Some people walk through life unnoticed," he whispered to himself, "but they leave a mark on everyone they touch." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, handwritten, almost illegible. It was a note Evelyn had left him during extraction, pressed into his field jacket. "Survive, keep moving, don't look back." Jack smiled softly. He had followed those instructions. He was alive. His team was alive. And somewhere out there in the world, Evelyn Cross continued to operate in the shadows, her legend intact, her anonymity preserved. He turned to go back inside, but paused for a moment, letting the wind whip across his face. The life he had fought to reclaim was here, tangible and fragile, and he knew that the lessons of survival, courage, and trust were inseparable from the memory of the woman who had guided him through death's grip. In the months that followed, Jack continued his missions. each operation informed by the lessons of the valley. He became more precise, more aware, more capable, and every decision carried a silent acknowledgement of Evelyn Cross, the sniper who had saved his life and shaped his perspective forever. Official records would never carry her name, medals would never bear her deeds, the world would never know, but Jack Mercer knew, and that knowledge was enough. Some heroes need applause, some need medals. Evelyn needed nothing. She existed beyond recognition, beyond rules, and beyond fame. She was a shadow, a ghost, a legend, and the lives she saved carried the proof of her existence. Jack Mercer, once presumed dead, had returned from the brink. He had survived impossible odds, not because of luck, not because of training, but because someone had chosen to operate in the shadows, saving lives with precision, courage, and absolute disregard for recognition. He would carry her memory, her lessons, and her example with him forever. And in that, she had achieved what recognition could never provide: true immortality. Some legends do not need to be recorded. Some names are never written in reports. Some heroes exist only in the shadows. And yet, for those who survived, their existence is undeniable. Jack Mercer would never forget. And somewhere Evelyn Cross was out there, invisible, untouchable, saving lives, shaping legends, and walking forever in the shadows she had chosen.